Hi, my name's Leo and I'm a boat builder and a sailor, and I'm on a mission to get this boat, Tally-Ho, back from the Pacific Ocean to the UK to compete once again in the famous Fastnet race 100 years after she first won it in 1927. In the last episode we pulled Tally-Ho out of the water to try and fix a stiff rudder, and I took the rudder off the boat to try and see what's actually going on. Before we get into that though, there's a few other jobs we're going to try and get on with while Tally-Ho is in the boatyard. Okay, so while we've got the boat out of the water, we're going to do some varnish work on the transom. Now, I first varnished transom shortly after I put it back together, and then we've sort of added coats here and there when we've had time, but we never really got a good build-up of a lot of coats. And near the end, before we launched the boat, we were in such a rush, we used some high build product on there. It didn't work very well. The transom doesn't look very good. There's drips on it and parts of the varnish are peeling already. So we're going to take this opportunity while the rudder's off to strip the transom and start again, and hopefully we'll do it properly this time and it'll last a lot longer. I forgot to explain that I'm building scaffolding. I guess it's pretty obvious. Alright, I think that's done. First class quality Samson Boat Co scaffolding right here. Only the finest. Okay, bye. This is Bert, a local friend of the project. He kept an eye on the boat while we were in Tasmania. And while I was editing the last video, he got started on stripping and varnishing the transom. Now, when I had a proper look at the rudder pintles, I found quite a lot of galling and some quite severe corrosion on a couple of them. Now, this looks like it could be galvanic corrosion, and it did get me a bit worried about stray currents. So I decided to ask some experts their opinions, and while I waited for people to get back to me, I took advantage of some fair weather to start scraping the seams. I described in the last video how the swelling of the planks has forced the seam compound out, which is a good sign because it means the planks are getting tighter and more watertight. But in order to be able to effectively paint the hull with more anti-foul, it's necessary to scrape the excess seam compound off and then give it a quick sand. This shouldn't have to be done, or at least not to the same extent, very often. There's just a lot of seam compound right now after our first long period of being in the water after rebuilding the boat. So to measure how much, if any, misalignment there is in the rudder pintles or pins, I've just set up this very simple string line, and the string line is parallel to the top and the bottom pin, the same distance away from them. And then I'm just going to use a digital caliper to measure the distance between each pin and the string to see if they're all the same, which they should be ideally, or if there's some misalignment there. After that, I'll move the string to check in the other dimension. So I did manage to measure the misalignment in both the gudgeons and the pintles, and I measured that in both the fore and aft dimension and the thwartships dimension. And I know the method I was using to measure it isn't the most accurate, and it was pretty challenging to get around the prop, but I do think it gave me a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now I did measure some misalignment, most of it was in a fore and aft dimension, and actually I think most of it was coming from movement in the boat itself rather than movement in the rudder. And although it wasn't a huge amount, I do think that in combination with the grease washing out, it would have been enough to put a lot of pressure on those pins and cause some galling, which is when metals are under such pressure that they almost weld themselves together. And so material from the pins has sort of been rolled up and pushed up into bumps, and that scores the gudgeons, and that makes the pins worse, and it kind of is self-perpetuating. Now it does look like there was some kind of corrosion going on there, but it's not possible to tell just by looking exactly what sort of corrosion that is. It is possible that just the galling and the friction and the wear has sort of caused an internal corrosion in the bronze itself, and that that's nothing to do with anything external. But of course it is also possible that it's some kind of galvanic corrosion, a galvanic reaction, and that could be due to some stray current either from Tally-Ho or from another boat. Now I don't think it is from Tally-Ho. We did a lot of testing for that before, and the fittings in question aren't connected to Tally-Ho's electrical system, so it seems unlikely, but we can't rule it out completely. Now we can't test for stray current out of the water, but we will do another round of testing for that after we launch again. It's also possible that at some point we were exposed to stray current from a different boat in the marina perhaps, but in practice, although I hear a lot of stories about that, it's actually pretty rare to see that actually happening. So I think it's fairly unlikely. Another theory is that there could be some kind of reaction going on between the zinc in the bronze and the type of grease we used, or there could be any number of other things going on which we haven't figured out. So we're not exactly sure, and it could be actually several different things happening at once. But I am sure that the high pressure on the pintles is certainly a big part of it. So the reason that I'm cutting all the pins shorter here is that I measured the very lowest pin to be very slightly twisted or askew, and it's much longer than it needs to be, so the bottom part of it is rubbing inside the gudgeon. However, if I want to shorten the lowest pin, I also have to shorten the rest of them, because the lowest pin needs to be slightly longer than all the others, as that makes it easier to mount and unmount the rudder onto the boat.
Hi, I'm Bob. I helped Leo out with the rig on Tally-Ho. Just come up to Sydney here to hang out with Leo for a few days and visit a few other people in the area and tell him what he's doing wrong on the bottom job.
Okay, so we cleaned up all the pins and removed all the galling material, but we wanted to increase the tolerances a bit more to try and reduce the chances of this happening again. And so we selectively removed a little more material on the middle 3 pins, based on the measurements that I took and the misalignment that I found. So it was worse on some pins than others, and we also cleaned up the insides of the gudgeons, but we did decide it would be better to remove material from the pins rather than increasing the size of the holes in the gudgeons, and part of the reason for that is long-term serviceability. If this whole system needs to be overhauled at some point, these pins can actually be relatively easily removed. The brackets would have to come off, but then the pins can come out and be replaced. But if the holes in the gudgeons got too big and we needed new gudgeons, those pieces would have to be recast. It would be a lot more work and a lot more expense. Now, we didn't take off a lot of material from the pins. It won't have reduced their strength by any significant degree, so I'm not at all worried about that. Bob also made these washers. This is UHMW, which is a very slippery plastic, and we're going to put these washers in between the pinholes and the gudgeons so that when the weight of the rudder is pressing down, it should be a little less friction when it's moving. And the other thing I'm doing is getting hold of a really long grease gun extension hose so that I can actually grease these underwater. Now, in the long term, if I find that I do have to actually grease them pretty often, that might not be ideal, and I might plumb in some kind of permanent greasing tubes. But for now, I think the other work we've done should mean, hopefully, that we won't need as much grease. Now that the seams have been scraped back and we've put some new seam compound in where it's been needed, we're sanding the hull in order to prepare it for the new coats of anti-foul. As you can see, we're wet sanding using water to catch the dust and prevent it going into the air. So we've actually been battling the weather quite a bit. It's been really rainy here over the last week, which has really slowed down progress on some of the work we've been trying to do. But at least we have had the transom covered, so we've been getting coats of varnish on that pretty regularly, although it's drying quite slowly because it's so cold. But we're up to 9 coats now, and we finally got a nice dry day, if somewhat cold. So we got the tent down, and we're going to try and get the rudder on. We're also going to try and get our anti-foul on today. Okay, so we got the rudder almost back on again, but it is not sliding into place as easily as it should. It's just as difficult basically as when it was coming out, and so there's clearly still some misalignment there. It's perhaps in a slightly different dimension to the misalignment we already took care of. So we're taking some measurements now because we can actually see the misalignment more clearly now it's kind of in place, and then we're going to drop the rudder again and take a little bit more material selectively off certain pins. Rough. Many thanks to Peter, Steve, Bert and Phil for helping out with the anti-fouling. Very much appreciated, and many hands really do make light work. What do you think, Bob? Is it going to go on this time?
I'm 100% confident that we've got it this time. Yep.
All right, 100%. That's funny. That reminds me of something.
Somebody was recounting that to me a few days ago, and it's like, yeah, well, I was totally confident.
Hold. Okay, we're going to need more on the top line. There we go.
Yeah, nice. Sliding right down in there, isn't she?
Oh, that feels a lot easier already.
Ready for this? Here we go. Woo!
Hey!
Alright, that feels good.
Well, the rudder is swinging really freely and really easily now. It was even blowing in the wind a little bit earlier, so it's much more free than it's ever been. But we didn't take off so much material that I'm at all worried about the strength of the pins. I'm really pleased with how that's all turned out. And we've got a lot of other work done while the boat's been out of the water. The transom's looking great. Now, it was great to see Bob and have some help from him. It was really kind of him to stop off for a couple of days, and it was really kind of the other guys who came down to help us anti-foul. So very grateful to all of them. And we're almost ready now to launch Tally Ho again, but I have to get this video released first. So thanks a lot for watching, and a massive, massive thank you to everyone who has donated or otherwise supported this project. It does make a huge difference. It means we're able to keep on sailing and maintaining this boat, and it means we're able to keep on making these videos. So I really, really appreciate it. I'll see you next time. Cheers.